We are still in the midst of a pandemic that has killed more than 700,000 people in the United States and emptied out churches for more than a year. To find out how this crisis has reshaped churches and their missions, we welcome Reverend Molly Carlson, Conference Minister for the United Church of Christ, the Illinois Conference of the United Church of Christ. Again, I say welcome to you, Reverend Molly. It has been quite an interesting over 18, 19 months for the United Church of Christ, I'm sure, as well as probably churches all across the world. But tell me how you've been experiencing it so far. What have been your major things right now that have just been different for you?
It has been a tough season for the church in general. The level of stress, the level of how dramatic and fast the changes, the constant decision making. Do we open the church? Do we close the church? How do we protect each other? What do we do? What is the most faithful response to this pandemic and to the vaccine and to our neighbors and to our communities? How do we do mission? There's so many questions all the time. And so I'm experiencing and noticing a whole lot of decision fatigue in our churches. One of the critical issues that I talk about with some of my colleagues is we're noticing a very high rate of pastoral transitions. So by that, I mean retirements, resignations, people leaving the ministry, taking time off from the ministry. We have very few interim ministers, and we have a growing number of openings where churches don't have a pastor right now, and we're not sure how we're going to get that. We have fewer applicants to every opening as well. It's the employment shortage that we see in all sorts of different industries across the country right now, particularly in any helping profession. There's just such a deep level of fatigue and compassion fatigue that is being experienced.
Now, I know that the Illinois Conference has both small churches and big churches. We've had some churches that have been very technologically advanced, and then we've got some who probably did not do anything when it came to internet or social media. Have you experienced that? And what have the smaller churches per se, how have they been handling this so far?
It like you said, Jasmine, it's completely across the spectrum from fully integrated technology with several people on staff that can support the technology to absolutely none. And slow mail being the primary form of communication, slow mail and telephone. But you'd be surprised. Some of our small churches are some of our most adapted to integrating with the technology. Some of the success stories that we've seen in our small churches include one of the realities that our small churches and our rural churches face is there tends to, as their young people mature, they tend to leave for the cities. This is something that happens across the whole country. There's sort of a movement from small towns into urban areas for employment when young people grow up. They aren't moving into our churches in the other locations. And so as our small rural churches have integrated technology into their lives and offered their services on Zoom or on Facebook Live or on other platforms, some of those kids and grandkids that grew up in the church are now coming back because they don't live in their small town anymore, but that's where they find their spiritual renewal and their spiritual connection. So some of our small churches, through the use of technology, are enhancing and growing their ministries in some really fascinating ways.
So this has been quite an opportunity for some churches to actually get growth, which is kind of, I know it's not a good time and things aren't the greatest, but the church has had to rethink itself and it's even been growing. So that's an awesome story to tell. I know there are 241 churches in the Illinois Conference. Would you say that all of them have been on board with kind of this technological thing, or do you think a lot of them or some of them have kind of lagged behind and stayed within their little same spaces, or what do you say?
I see everything from embracing and being actually healthier online to churches that have chosen to close. I've participated in a couple church closures in the last 3 or 4 months, and I anticipate that there will be others where they haven't been able to adapt to the rapid changes. They were likely struggling before the pandemic hit. The pandemic tends to be the last straw, but not the only straw that leads to the end of the public witness of a congregation. But even in those times when an individual church closes, organizations have a life cycle, and we're Easter people, right? We're people of the resurrection. So when something dies, it doesn't mean the end of the church or end of a faith journey. These members are able to melt back into the body of Christ and pursue their own journeys in other settings where they might not be burdened with doing all of the church stuff that ends up falling on the faithful few at the very end. And it's exhausting. And in a season where there are so many pressures that lead to that fatigue, that leaders of very small churches really particularly feel the burden of that. And if they're not able to leverage their resources to connect with the wider community, it's too much. And God isn't done with those individuals. God isn't done with their buildings or their assets of those churches. So it is a moment of death and sadness, and it is a moment of anticipation of new life and how will God work with us next.
So it's been some growth and some transformation, and even going to probably definitely be some resurrection for some. So I think that's a good thing for the church. While there again are negative things, I think that's a good thing for the church. So can you talk about reopening? What has the process been with reopening? Are all of the churches in the conference following the same guidelines, different guidelines? Are they coming into the pews? What's happening?
There are no consistencies in terms of what is happening. There are churches that have been back open since probably April or May of 2020. Living with different restrictions. It really depends on their location. There are other churches that are still not open for public worship. We have churches that are open for public worship, but they don't sing. We have churches that are open for public worship and are doing a lot of churches are doing a hybrid model where they're open for a public gathering as well as offering their services online. That is probably the most common right now. Also, most common is masking. For anybody who's present in person would be required to mask, but some of our churches don't. There's so much cultural and theological variation within the United Church of Christ in Illinois that each context is invited and encouraged to make their own decisions. What we advise from the conference office is we advise to follow the CDC and the state guidelines. We encourage vaccination as a statement of faith because we are called as people to work for a just world for all, and we are called as a people to care for our communities. And vaccination is one of the ways that best supports community health and wholeness. But we don't insist on it. I don't know of some churches, but most churches do not check vaccine cards, or make that a mandatory thing to participate in worship. We're really all over the spectrum.
Can you tell me some other ways that you think that the pandemic has changed the church?
Some of the ways we've learned to connect with each other and rely on one another have changed, that we have some new tools. I particularly am aware of that for years, for decades, folks that have been homebound, all churches have had members who are homebound, who are in nursing homes or are unable because of personal disability or health issues to come out and attend worship. And every church has had some plan on how to support those folks, but now they're fully integrated in ways they haven't been before. And I think that is an exciting possibility that we need to claim and hold on to going forward. We've also found ways to reach communities that are well beyond our geographic borders. We have a lot of churches that are building community and finding new members, actually taking that step of membership that don't live in Illinois, even the United States, that live around the world. We're a tradition that often is friendly to LGBTQ folks. Not every congregation is as welcoming as others, but there's a lot of places in the world where it is not safe. You cannot practice your Christian faith as an openly queer person. And within the United Church of Christ and within our communities, we're opening some avenues for some acceptance and for some welcome throughout the country. So many of our churches start their service by saying, no matter who you are or where you are in life's journey, you are welcome here. And we're finding new ways to extend that welcome. And I find that really exciting.
Super, super, super exciting. And I know for myself that I have taught classes, Zoom 101. I'm teaching people how to use Zoom and teaching people what it means to use Facebook and chat. And again, the world is definitely opened up to the church. So I think, again, it's quite the amazing thing. Would you say that membership has changed, or any financial contributions have changed, or have they kind of held up, or how's that been going during the pandemic?
In 2020, we were expecting that they would drop off, but they held pretty steady. 2021, we're seeing more of a drop off, and there are national studies that show that philanthropic giving is dropping off in 2021. Anyhow, just with some of the strains of life that have been occurring. My church, few of my churches are reporting that their in-person attendance is as high as it was pre-pandemic, but many of them are getting close. And if they include the online participants, that changes too. But one of the things about Sunday morning worship experience is it becomes habitual. It becomes what you do on Sunday morning. You get up and you do that. And that habit has been well and thoroughly broken for many people. You get up and you don't try to get your kids out of their pajamas. You can just go sit on the couch and participate in worship, or the rhythm of life just changes. And so getting back into that habit, it'll take some time, and it'll take some work on the behalf of our churches to find creative new ways to re-engage their communities, both the longtime members, the newer members and participants, and folks that just need what the church has to offer. There are people that are lonely and needing that sense of belonging, and needing in-person community in ways that they didn't before because of how the pandemic has isolated us. And so I think it's a great day of opportunity, and different congregations are differently able to be differently set to be able to act on those opportunities.
I like to call it faith on demand, right? Like you can,
Yeah.
if you are lonely right now, you can get on the internet and find a service about loneliness. If you are in need of a greater strength of faith, you get on there and you can search a service about faith. So it is faith on demand in these moments, which I think is changing the way we do church. And I'm not sure, I don't know about you, but I'm not sure it'll ever go back to the way that it used to be.
I don't
I
think it
guess
will, and
time will tell.
I don't think it needs to. I look at the history of the Church of Jesus Christ for 2,000 years. It does not look now like it did 5 years ago, and 5 years ago doesn't look like it looked like 600 years ago. God isn't done with us yet. There's still good news. There's gospel good news to share, and the metrics of how we evaluate whether church is successful have to change. But what matters is transforming lives, is connecting people with one another, with God, with meaning beyond the mundane. And that's what we're about.
I say amen to that. Yes, amen to that. So what are some of the current mission focuses for the conference, and have they been influenced by COVID?
One of the things that we're doing as a conference-wide initiative right now is we're raising money to alleviate medical debt. We're able to purchase medical debt on the debt market for pennies on the dollar. So while an individual person may be burdened and not able and heavily burdened by the costs of medical debt, as a community of faith, we're able to pool our dollars and make a big difference. So right now we are in the middle of a campaign to eradicate $10 million of medical debt for our neighbors here in Illinois. Now, most of this debt is incurred prior to COVID because it takes a while through collections and all these pieces to have that debt available to purchase. But we all know that the pandemic has left a huge burden on people's lives financially, physically, grief. Our community will never be the same, just the fabric of our community. What better effort to gather us together and to have a common purpose to raise money to eradicate this debt. We're as a conference, we're working to raise $100,000, which will pay off 10 million. It's a 100-fold factor of how much difference we can make in our communities. And this isn't something we may have planned to do pre-COVID, but it is the type of effort that lends itself to sharing resources and videos that can be shared in worship over anybody's Zoom platform. It's an initiative that lends itself to social media and these other technology platforms that were not as broadly used 2 years ago. So I'm optimistic and hopeful that this common justice effort will bear great fruit.
Amazing work. That's amazing work. Can you tell me how you personally have been experiencing this pandemic? What's been your greatest challenge, or what sustained you during this time?
I started this job in the pandemic. My whole interview, hiring process, everything has started during the pandemic. And I used Zoom a lot before, but not this much. It's not uncommon for me to be on Zoom for 9 hours in a day. You know, it's just how we connect. One of the beautiful things is we have much higher participation rates on our committees because no one has to do travel time. But I miss the in-person connections. I miss being able to sit down with a pastor and just having coffee and hearing their story and what's going on. It's different when it's over when the computer's between us, when the camera's between us. So I look forward to some of those opportunities. But it has been a full and blessed time. It is a time for visionary leadership. It is a time for hope and messages of hope, because there is so much at work to bring us down. And I really feel like the gospel good news is a message of hope, and is so desperately needed at such a time as this.
And so I like what you said. You talked about that idea of the human touch and the human connection. We've got a lot of people concerned about what's going to happen, but people want to be with people. So I think that, the pews will still have people in them, because people, there's something about that relationship, being in person with one another.
Absolutely. I agree wholeheartedly with that.
Yeah, so I say thank you. Is there anything else you want to make sure that we know about the church during this pandemic?
There are plenty of folks who are trying to get back to how things used to be. And I don't think that's the path forward. I don't think that's where God is leading us. We have this opportunity to embrace some new ways of being. We have people in our midst that have new needs, and the church is called to make a difference. And we're here and we're strong, and there is much work to be done.
So that UCC statement, God is still speaking.
God is still speaking. Absolutely.
Thank you for joining us, Reverend Carlson. I am Jasmin Taylor for Different Drummers and the Greater Chicago Broadcast Ministries. Keep the faith.